recording this episode all about Ollie's birth, you might hear me coming out a little more harsh or just really passionate about our birth experience and why I believe what I believe as far as trusting your body and believing that birth is a physiological process. And I just want to give you a little bit of a backstory as to why I'm so passionate about this. It's not something that I always talk about or bring up, especially on our podcast or on a day-to-day. And that's because I know that everyone's birth preferences and birth experiences are so different. And for me, even before I got married and kids was even on the radar, I honestly had a really bad view of birth. I was scared about birth. You know, you see Hollywood movies of women screaming, lying on their back, postpartum depression, all of these things. And I would say that generally was my viewpoint. I didn't know. And thankfully, like my mom had a great birth experience. And after I got married, I had friends that had started having kids, and several of them, really close friends, actually had really beautiful birth experiences. And so I began asking questions, and they were so generous in educating me on how powerful and incredible and even beautiful a birth experience could be. And so from that perspective, I honestly started going down a little rabbit hole of just really educating myself on birth and how I can trust my body, and even just how sometimes like Western medicine sets things up that can be challenging for women to have an incredible birth experience. And so for me, just as we always practice what we preach, like educate yourself and pay for, invest in yourself. And so for me, in the business world, Stephen and I, we always try and invest in something that we want to learn from. And birth was really important to me. So I spent hours, whether my time investment or a money investment, in educating myself. And I've just seen that really pay off in both my pregnancies and birth. And so I love talking about just empowering women and that our bodies were created for birth. And so that's why in this podcast episode, you might hear me get a little fiery about certain things and opinions, and it's not to poke at you if you have a different viewpoint. It's just something that I've seen for myself. And so when I get the opportunity to share, I always love to. And so for Ollie's birth story specifically, I just share with you a little bit about my opinions and things that have worked well for us. So if it's not your opinion, or you had a very different experience or want something totally different than what I desired, what we desired, that's totally fine. But this is just our story, and I'm so excited to share it with you.
Okay, so here's the thing. How are families like us, who don't want to hustle away thousands of hours per week, how do we stop trading time for money so we can create residual income, so we can break poverty and build generational wealth?
All without neglecting our family. If that's your mission, this podcast is your motivation. Listen in as we leave the I can't mindset behind and push powerfully into the abundance of how can I instead.
We are Stephen and Chelsey.
And this is the Rainmaker Family Show. Okay.
It's been a while since we've done this.
It has been a while. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Rainmaker Family Show. It is so good to be back. If you have been listening to us the last couple of months, we have actually been on paternity, maternity leave. There we go. That's hard to say. We had a baby boy on March 6th, Oliver Wave, and we bulk stacked a bunch of amazing podcast interviews. So if you've been listening to those were actually when I was still pregnant, and we made sure that you still had amazing content and getting breakthrough, even while we were snuggling on the couch with our little boy or at the park with Kaizen, whatever it was we were doing. So these next couple episodes that are going to come out, we are so excited to share with you. Just dive into a little bit more personal stuff. Today, we're going to talk all about Oliver's birth, how Stephen was actually in Mexico when I knew that he was going to be born really soon. So I was like, hey, Stephen, you need to get home ASAP. Otherwise, I'm going to have this baby by myself. We're going to share with you the meaning of his name and how that has played out, including a hospital scare that we had, as well as some takeaways from paternity, maternity leave. So buckle up. It's going to be a good ride. And we just hope that you feel like you are sitting across from us on our couch, drinking a LaCroix, maybe a glass of wine, whatever your drink of choice is, some H2O. I've been drinking a lot of water lately. as we just share with you more about what has been happening in our lives and our new baby boy.
If you're new here, we are the Rainmaker family, and we're on a mission to empower families with financial freedom and time freedom. And this podcast is all about that. But this episode, if this is the first one you're tuning into, will be a little bit different, and you will definitely get to know a more personal side of us. And this story starts in Mexico. Me and Chelsey believe in investing ourselves. We're in a bunch of masterminds. And it just so happened that one of these masterminds was pretty close to Chelsea's due date. A little bit too close where she's like, I'm not flying. You go to this thing. I'll stay home. So we took another business partner of ours. Me and Jeff went out to Mexico, had an awesome time, but it was Thursday night. And I remember the call, just like it was yesterday. Chelsey called and she's like, I went in to see the midwives today and like this is happening and that is happening. And I think you should come home. Right.
Yeah.
And I knew this was going to happen. I actually spoke on a panel at this mastermind and I actually told the entire audience, I was like, if my phone rings and I run out of this room during the panel, it's because my wife is super pregnant and we're about to have a baby. Right. So like everyone knew. And so it was kind of this joke because the next day I just disappeared. Right. And I posted in the Facebook group, like, my wife's having a baby. Now, the reality was Chelsey wasn't like immediately having the baby, but it definitely was going to happen very soon. And so we'll tell you why I came home very fast, but there is a fun story on the way home that challenged me and my inner introvert. So I got the first flight home early in the morning, got up at like 5 a.m., flew from Mexico to San Francisco. My car was at Sacramento. So I got a rental car from San Francisco to Sacramento, swapped cars, and then drove home to Chico. So it was quite an adventure to get back home. But I wasn't sure because honestly, Chelsey could have the baby at any moment, right? She was getting pretty close. There were signs that were showing. So I was like, I need to get home as fast as possible. And so I got to San Francisco, which is a pretty big city. And the only rental cars that were available at this point were not like the nice rental cars or not even like the reputable companies. It was like the lowest, like budget, like rental car ever. And I think when I got to San Francisco, it was like there was like 2 or 3 companies that shared a booth, right? Because like they were probably like the cheapest price, they probably were paying the lowest rent, right? So I get there and there's a line that is probably like an hour long. It's like a super long line that's winding back and forth. And I get to the back of the line. I'm like, oh my gosh, my wife's having a baby. I need to get home. And I asked the guy in front of me, I'm like, is this line moving like at all? He's like, no. So at that moment, I had to make a decision. I was like, am I going to either wait in this line and potentially like put more pressure and stress on Chelsey by not being home? And maybe she's even going to start having this baby, or I have to man up and face my ultimate fear, which is going in front of strangers and asking them for me to cut this line. Oh my gosh, in San Francisco. So I walk up to the front of this huge line of people. And I just like, I don't know, like I didn't know what to say. So I just said, attention, everyone. Like I just like am yelling this, like, attention, everyone. And like everyone looks over, like they probably think I'm like about to rob the place. Right. And I'm like, my wife is having a baby in Chico, California. Like I need to get home now.
Drive,
So, this is all true. My wife was having a baby. She wasn't, maybe as urgently as I was thinking it sound, but I was like, I got to cut this line. Other people let me cut this line. Right. So like my wife's having a baby, like, would anyone be opposed to me cutting this line? And so like, it was just like awkward silence after this point. There was like crickets. I could hear crickets in the room. And then from the very back of the crowd, some guy is like, prove it. So at that point, it's just like very awkward. And so I was just like, okay, well, if anyone is opposed, just, feel free to speak up. And I just like got in front of the line and I just like pretend like it didn't happen. And everyone was kind of like not sure what to happen. I think it caught them off guard, honestly, is what happened. And no one wanted to speak up and say anything. So the rental car guy, of course, heard this as well. So he calls me up to the thing. He's like, you can come up if you're having a boy. And I'm like, we're having a boy. So he's like, yeah. And so we talked and he had 2 boys. We have 2 boys. So we connected. And by that point, I think the crowd had warmed up a little bit because they're probably listening to our conversation. And on the way out, people were like, go get him, drive safe. So like, I think it like sunk in that they'd done a good deed. And so on my way out, I just thanked the crowd. I was like, thank you guys. If anyone ever sees me again, I owe you one. I'll do anything for you. I owe you a favor. And then I think it was the same guy, probably from the back of the crowd. He yelled out, I want your car. And I was like, except for that. And I ran out. And so I was like, oh, this is great. I'll never see these people again. So it was scary. I am an introvert, online I can be a little more extroverted, but this was like, like, I was like, I have to just kind of own up and do this thing. It was a stretching moment, but it was nice because I was like, I'll never see these people again. So if you're listening to the podcast and you were there in line, thank you. That really did help because I was able to get home and then the baby came very shortly after
Yeah.
that.
Definitely. And it was nice having Stephen home when he did. He got to put Kai to bed and it was needed. So whenever I talk about birth or parenting or anything else like that, I feel like we need to put some disclaimers out there and just say that we hope that this story, Oliver's birth story, and the things that transpired from it is encouraging to you and empowering to you. This is not a birth story so that you can go and feel guilt or shame or start comparing your life or your birth story to ours. I just know as women and as mamas, it's so easy to do that. And I feel like there can be a lot of trauma and things that just unfortunately in the healthcare system and all kinds of stuff. I just felt like I needed to say that this is not to cause comparison or bring up past wounds or trauma. It's just to encourage and empower you. And Stephen and I always want to be people that share wins and losses and just our life. And so with that, having a baby is sharing with you a piece of our life and it is vulnerable. And so we're excited to dive into that. But just if you're feeling in comparison or any shame or guilt, just know that maybe just to check in on those points in your heart and just see if there's another level of freedom that you can experience.
Also, I will say that like we do have some pretty strong opinions on birth and kind of things revolving in it. Chelsey specifically has really educated me and educated herself on a lot of these different things. And so our opinions might not be your opinion. So let's stay friends no matter what we say, yeah, let's go from there. So why did I come home from Mexico? Let's talk about that. There was a little bit of drama in this birth that caused you to say, hey, Stephen, come home.
Yeah. So I want to back up just even a little bit more. So Kaizen's birth story, I did blog that. You can read that in the show notes. I feel like that is a huge piece that I grew from and learned. I really went down this rabbit hole essentially of learning about birth, understanding that birth is a physiological process and that we can trust our bodies. And I believe that birth does not have to be traumatic. Postpartum does not have to be as hard or exhausting as some of it is meant out to be. And I believe that you can have a really positive birth experience, and having the right providers and just understanding the process has given me a lot of freedom and understood my, rights and what I am truly capable of and what I can see happen even in like a hospital birth. So I would encourage you to read that. There's some great resources at the end of this blog post too of things I clung to. So going into this birth with both of our boys, Kaizen, I had a very textbook birth, meaning I went into labor, contractions started happening. They never let up. He was born within 12 hours. I had a very physiological birth. I trusted my body. It was 12 hours from start to finish. And so I feel like Kaizen's birth showed me what was possible and that I could really trust my body and let things go. So going into this birth with Oliver, I was playing the same thing, like an unmedicated, no intervention kind of birth. And so I was 37 weeks the week that Stephen was going to Mexico, and I had total peace with him going. And I even said, if I have this baby by myself, we had hired a doula, Shay was there for Kaizen's birth. I knew everything would be okay. So I knew that, but I had gone in, and because I was 37 weeks, that's considered full term. And at my 37-week appointment, I was having high blood pressure, which is a sign that you could potentially have preeclampsia, which I honestly didn't know a lot about. And I wasn't super concerned about it either. But looking back on it in hindsight, I think I was really stressed out. I was stressed out that Stephen was gone, trying to care for a toddler. There are things in our business that I was still trying to put my hands in. I think when I had Kaizen versus when having Ollie in pregnancy wise, we're just at a very different place in our business. We're leaders of an incredible company, but sometimes for me, at least, when I have my hands in a lot of different things, that can create pressure and create intensity. And I think I didn't know how to fully release that. And I was still just had my hands in a lot of different places, plus caring for a toddler on a day-to-day basis. So
I think too,
stress
like when
was
I went to
building.
Mexico, right? Like it was kind of like Kaizen came 2 weeks early. So we were like, just hold out with Ollie. Like
Yeah.
this Mexico trip was like 4 weeks before your due date, right?
Yeah.
And so we were like, we'll just like hold out. And I kept saying, like, I'll get home from Mexico and then you'll have the baby, like right
Yeah.
then. Like it was just like, kind of, let's get it done. So that's kind of thinking what your body was preparing for too. But like that week, you were like, all right, I think like it's time to do this thing. Like, Stephen, you gotta get home. So I came home a couple days early because of the high blood pressure thing, because of kind of just bringing peace back to the household, helping out. And it was a really good decision. And I think like in this whole process, you have to be careful who you listen to, right? Because there's a lot of different opinions out there. And even sometimes, I don't know, we've experienced kind of both spectrums of doctors or healthcare professionals that are more like, I would say, nurturing and faith filled. And then there's some people that are just more fear filled. It's kind of like, I don't know, or fear led. I don't know. And these people I'm sure have seen, terrible things. So they like to talk about those things, but it's just like, I don't know, the way one of the people talked to Chelsey, it just really kind of like poked at the fear thing.
So Thursday was the day that I called Stephen when he was in Mexico saying, hey, I think you need to come home. And on Thursday was my 37-week midwife appointment. I love midwives. I can't say enough good things about them. I think they're absolutely incredible. I love the way that they focus on just the care that they've given me. So anyway, and usually when you have preeclampsia, especially if your blood pressure is super high, the suggestion is induction. And so I'd gotten a call Thursday in the afternoon, and I'd also done a urine test. So I'd gotten a call from my midwife later in the day on Thursday, and she said, hey, I was wondering if you'd be willing to come in tonight to be monitored at the hospital to do some additional testing. You did have high blood pressure and you had protein in your urine, which are two things that are a sign of preeclampsia. And the suggestion for preeclampsia is induction. And so she left me a message, and things from there just felt like, oh my gosh, like, wow, I must be way more stressed out than I thought that I was. So I'd gotten that call from my midwife, and I had called Stephen and I said, they're asking me to come into the hospital to do additional testing. And the suggestion is induction. And so just the word induction alone really heightened like the severity of what could be happening. And so I just knew like Stephen needed to come home. And so I started researching about preeclampsia, called my midwife and said, my 2-year-old just went down to bed. It was like 7 p.m. Like, do you really need me to come in tonight, or can I schedule to come in the next morning on Friday? And she said, okay, well, she said, you can come in on Friday. So I knew that it wasn't that serious, but it was just like, oh, baby might be coming or need to come sooner than we anticipated. So thankfully, like Stephen just shared with you guys his hilarious story in San Francisco. On Friday, he flew home. And that Friday afternoon, I had agreed to go to the hospital, or I guess Friday morning at like 10 a.m. I'd agreed to go into the hospital.
It's like a family time in the morning. I remember that.
No, this is the next day. You weren't
I got home
on
Thursday night?
No, you got
home
home
Friday. And we went in Saturday.
Yeah. So on Friday, I agreed to do an additional non-stress test at the hospital at 10 a.m. So I went in. This was without Stephen.
Oh, I'm still on my way home.
He's still on his way home. I agreed to do a testing, and I honestly thought like, of course my blood pressure is high. Like, I'm stressed out. I'm running a business. I'm caring for a baby. My husband is gone. My body's preparing for labor. Like, duh, I'm stressed out, So I didn't really think much of it. And I said, I'd rather certain things you'll learn. Stephen and I totally love medical advice, but sometimes we're willing, because I know my body really well. I just was like, okay, I don't know if I really need to be worried or anything. So I went into the hospital to the labor and delivery unit or floor, and they did a non-stress test, and I totally thought my blood pressure would go down, and it didn't. Over the 2-hour period, it just continued to go up. And so that was very alarming to my midwife. And I think because of hospital policy, my midwife, I think, since they're technically under OBs that are at the hospital, so I think she had to relate to the OB on call that I had high blood pressure. And because this OB knew who I was, that OB decided to come in and definitely had some, what I felt like, some fear tactics, and said things like 1 in 200 women get preeclampsia, and this is very
Or
serious.
1 in 200
women will get a
will
seizure
die from
and die
preeclampsia.
of preeclampsia. It's just a matter of which woman that will be, and we need to induce
Oh my
right
gosh.
away, and all of these things. And
So intense.
it was very intense, and nothing against if you decide to go with a provider that's an OB. But to me, I've had different experiences, and OB care, at least the ones that I've experienced, versus midwifery care were drastically different. And it was almost like comical the way, like, you hear about, at least in the world that I researched, a lot of fear tactics, and OBs want to induce early, and like one intervention leads to another, and all these things. And it was like so clearly right up in my face that this was happening to me. And I just told this OB, I said, well, I'm not being induced today, even though that is what you want me to do. My husband's gone and all these things. Because my midwife was saying, you might have preeclampsia, you might have it based on these things. And the OB was straight up like, you have preeclampsia, and this is what it means, and this is really serious, and you could die, and all these things, which is true. So I just knew that there was another level of severity there, but I wasn't willing to be induced. And so the OB wanted me to do a couple other things, and I said, hey, I have a massage appointment in like 40 minutes that I really want to make it to. So I agreed to be discharged because I was like, I'm not being induced today. But I did talk to my midwife, and she said, I would recommend you coming in tomorrow. So I agreed to that. So Stephen got home on Friday night, and we had some good family time, and I was just really wrestling because we could have totally stayed home, and I mean, my blood pressure, sorry, I get blood pressure and blood sugar like mixed up sometimes, but my blood pressure were normal at home, and we could have just stayed home the entire time. I also started having some very mild contractions when the doctor came in to tell me that I had preeclampsia. So I knew that my body was getting ready. And so that gave me peace that if we did agree, because you agree, your provider and the nurses and doctors and all that, they work for you. So you get to make the decisions. No one is making you do anything. So I agreed. I don't know. I like using language that's like, you agree, instead of they made me do this. I hear that all the time.
I think you just learn to be a little more powerful in a conversation like that, instead of powerless and just like, well, I'm just at your mercy. Because there are a lot of options that you have. And you did a lot of work on educating yourself in advance on those things so that there wasn't fear that crept in just because it was unknown.
Yeah.
And preeclampsia was unknown to both of us for the most part.
Yes.
But we bought ourselves time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were like, no, not today. And then even when we went in the next day, we bought ourselves a little more time and actually did some more research, did some praying, and that helped us make way better educated decisions that were in power and not based on fear, but based on faith and some facts that we found.
Yeah. So, that night, so Friday night, Stephen had gotten home, and I was just wrestling through with, do I just stay home and let my body go into complete labor all by itself, or do tomorrow, if my blood pressure continues to stay high, will I let them induce me? Like, am I okay with being induced? And that was really hard for me, because oftentimes when women are induced, sometimes your body responds right away and it's fine. Or honestly, I was really praying that my body would go into labor naturally that night, and that we wouldn't have to go into the hospital unless I was like fully having the baby. But my body was starting to have contractions. They were very far apart and nothing serious, but I knew that my body was working towards getting our baby out. And I actually called a friend who had 3 different girls. She had a home birth, a VBAC, and a C-section. So like all the spectrum of births. And one of her first birth, she did have to take Pitocin. And for me, getting induced, your chances are higher of more interventions and ending in a C-section. And for me, my goal from the beginning was that I believe birth is a physiological process. I know my body was equipped and made for this. I wanted an unmedicated, low intervention. Like that was my top goal. And so I knew being induced, if we allowed that and went that route, my chances were less. And Pitocin, I think, often is given right away, even though there are other methods of induction. And to me, I knew that I needed to face my fear of, if I got Pitocin, would I be able to labor and have the end result that I was desiring? And so my friend Liz, man, I love Liz. I was so grateful for her conversation. And I also had a conversation with another friend earlier in the week just about Pitocin and how I didn't need to be afraid of it. And before that, I think I was kind of afraid of it. And I was concerned, like, am I going to be able to really breathe through and relax through the contractions of Pitocin? Because that can amplify things and make you feel like you're further along when you're really not. So for me, that whole process was like letting go. So
yeah, it was cool you had that night to kind of mentally,
yeah,
because that's a big thing you do with Kaizen, is just like facing the battles before you go into them, like mentally in birth.
Yeah.
And dealing with any fears in advance before you're in the room, you know?
Yeah.
And so you were able to do that night with those conversations. And that was key.
Yeah, absolutely. So Saturday morning rolls around and we had agreed to go back into the hospital at 3 p.m. that afternoon to do another non-stress test and kind of figure out, like, are we going to be admitted? Are we not? And so again, I still was having contractions here and there. I had even like a bloody show. So I knew things were progressing. And we had a very normal Saturday morning. We went and got coffee. We went to the farmer's market. We had some good connecting time as a family. And my mom was going to come over and watch Kaizen that afternoon. And I just knew in my heart, I knew that if my blood pressure was still high, that we were going to be admitted. And we brought our hospital stuff with us in the car because I just had this knowing that
we say goodbye to Kaizen.
Yeah.
We told them your baby brother's coming.
Yeah. And the really sweet, the really sweet part was we were supposed to be at the hospital at 3 and it felt a little stressful getting out of the house, but Kaizen actually woke up right before we were packing our bags in the car to go to the hospital. So that was really special to me because I hugged him and I started to like cry, and I definitely cried on the way to the hospital because I knew that we were going to be admitted. I knew we were going to let them admit us, and I knew that it would be the last time I would see Kaizen without his little brother. But that was a really God moment, like bittersweet, that we got to have that moment together. So we go to the hospital. We have an amazing nurse who I felt like was really accommodating, and the midwife who was there the day before was there again, which was also really comforting because she knew our story and she had really helped me walk through some difficult decisions. And even the conversation with the OB that I felt kind of harsh the day before, she was there for all of that. So she was like an angel for me. And we go and do the non-stress test. And unfortunately, my blood pressure does not go down, even with Stephen being there and even with the lights dim and all these things. And so we just felt like, okay, like, I think we're okay with being admitted and being induced. And we asked a lot of questions like, is there a time clock if we're induced? And just all these important decisions. And that is where one of the first big decisions was kind of right in front of us. So we had to like process through and figure out, are we going to make a decision out of faith with some facts, or are we going to go a different direction? So with preeclampsia and the biggest risk is for a mom to have a seizure. Pre-eclampsia, I guess. Eclampsia is seizure.
Yeah.
And with that, typically, like an OB and a lot of hospitals will encourage you to also get a magnesium drip, which I didn't know about. And unlike Pitocin, a magnesium drip, you can't stop it. Like once they've given it to you, you have to like keep it on you and do the whole form, and magnesium can make you, they said, almost like feel
Highly
like
likely to make you feel
sick and
sick.
hungover. So it's like not only would you be laboring, which is already can be uncomfortable, but then you're feeling hungover the whole time. So that didn't sound fun at all. And again, we were told like this is highly recommended because magnesium helps you if you were to have a seizure. It helps like not have that
It helps
happen.
prevent seizures.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so everyone was recommending it. They're like, you should do the magnesium drip. And we we're kind of like, well, can we wait on it? They're like, no, you should do it because of this, this, and this. Right. And so at this point we were like, okay, we're going to get admitted. We're going to start something, right? Start some.
Yeah, I want before Pitocin. Pitocin was like my last resort. There are other more natural things that you can do. And the first one we were going to agree to do was the folic balloon.
You can Google these things if you don't know what they are. We're going to go into the details of what these things do, but there's a lot of natural ways. Even like we had the breast pump there.
Oh yeah.
So we're doing that. We were doing the folic tube. So there's like other things
Folic balloon.
Yes. See, I don't know what these things are called, but there's a tube. I know there's a tube in there somewhere. Anyways, so we were going to get admitted. And so I think we had something at the house I needed to go get.
Yeah, we forgot one thing at the house. And so they were like, yeah, Stephen, go home, get the thing because it'll take a minute to get admitted in your room and all set up and everything since it's different than just going into labor naturally. So
I was running home to grab something. And when we got back, it was like, that's when they want to start the magnesium drip.
Yeah, so they kind of gave us time frame. They're like, you don't have to do anything, but it is highly recommended that you do this magnesium drip because obviously seizure is really scary and you don't want to do that. And
the seizure can result to death. It can result to death of the baby, death of the mom, like all these things that they're like, you should do this. And now the midwife was framing it up so much nicer than the OB was.
Yeah.
She was so gracious about it and just like, it's your decision, all these things. So we felt like there was not a fear in there. But on the way home, it was kind of like, okay, are we going to, like, I need some more data on this thing. I'm kind of a data guy. If you know what we do in our program, we look at data to launch products even online, right? So as I was researching this, I was trying to figure out where's the data? Like, what does this actually mean? Like, and so the 1 in 200 number came up. It was like, I say 1 in 200 cases of preeclampsia leads to eclampsia, right? And here's all the signs, right? And so Chelsey was showing a couple of the signs, but not all the signs. And at that point, I felt like I was reminded of our son's name. Now, we told you our son's name. His name is Oliver Wave.
So we just took a quick little intermission. I now have Ollie on my lap, and I'm going to be feeding him while we tell his first story, which is perfect.
So you might hear a little bit of Ollie noises in the background.
Yeah, you might.
So I'm driving home from the hospital. We're weighing this decision. I'm like, oh, man, I really don't want Chelsey to be nauseous the entire time she's having this baby. Like, if there's any way, if there's any alternative, should we make this decision? It feels scary. Like, what if, I start going there, like, what if my wife has a seizure? What if the Chelsey and the baby die? Like, these are thoughts. These are real thoughts that come to your head in these times, right? And we've learned a lot about mindset and business, but I feel like it can really help us in our lives. And I feel like God spoke to me in this moment because he reminded me of Oliver's name, right? Oliver Wave is this name that we came up with for our son. And Wave actually just came to Chelsey randomly. Like, this name came out of nowhere. She just came to our head and just stuck. And we were going to name him Wave, like, for a while. That was just his first name. But we couldn't really figure out the middle name. So we moved Wave to the middle name, and it just flowed better with Oliver, which was one of the names we kind of just had on our list of like, we just really love the feeling of this name. Oliver, the olive tree, it just represents peace, right? And Oliver already is very much exemplifying peace. He is the most chill baby. He's sleeping all the way through the night. He's super peaceful. But also Ollie, you guys know we have a skate ramp in our backyard, like a little mini half pipe. Me and Kai love to skate back there. And the Ollie was a catalyst. And that was a word that we had. So I told you we kind of figure out the meaning of the names sometimes before we find the names. And one of the meanings that we knew this name would have would be catalyst. A catalyst is something like when it happens, it changes everything, right? And then the other theme that kept coming up in the season was really God's faithfulness, right? That you could trust the process. So these two themes were kind of coming at us in the season. We're like, this is what Ollie is going to carry. This is what he's going to walk in, as we want names that represent that. And so Oliver, the peace was the first thing we kind of came to, but then we connected the dots with the Ollie. So the Ollie is a trick in skateboarding. Okay. So I skateboard, guys into me like to play on the backyard ramp. And for so long, skateboarding was done on the ground. Okay. Like when skateboarding came out, like people did flatland tricks, like they'd spin around, they'd do handstands, they'd stay on the ground. But then one day, some guy popped his board off of the ground, defying gravity, and that's called an Ollie. Okay. It's called an Ollie. And if you look at skateboarding now, almost every trick you do is off the ground in the air. There's people jumping off buildings and jumping off big ramps. All that came, it was a catalyst from the Ollie. It's a foundational trick that blew everyone's mind at the time, but now it's like the first thing you learn when you skateboard. So Ollie, that's where Oliver, it's the piece and it's the catalyst. His middle name, Wave. This was one of those ones that it just like we knew it came out of nowhere. It felt really like I really like this name, but we didn't know how it related to these themes. And so I started researching waves. The really cool things about waves is that they start like way far out in the ocean and they'll travel for miles. They're actually created by wind. I didn't know this. I was like, maybe it's like shifting in the earth. I didn't really know until I researched. Waves are created by wind. Wind blows over the water and it creates waves, and they'll travel for miles uninterrupted until they crash on the shore. And that's pretty crazy when you see a wave crashing on the shore. That could have been traveling for miles and miles and miles across the ocean. The other really awesome part about wave that I started slowly connecting it to this theme of just like ever faithfulness, right? Faithfulness. Waves are so faithful, right? They just always are going. They're never stopping. You could go to the beach now, you can go to the beach in 20 years and the waves are still going to be there. They're constant. Now there are swells. There are things where it's like, if you surf, right? There's like a bunch of waves and there's like chill. There's a bunch of waves and there's chill. Like there are ebbs and flows, but the waves are always there. Sometimes you may be waiting for a wave, but it's always coming. And that's when it really hit me. And the story is that I don't know how old I was. I was like 5th grade or 6th grade, maybe. And my family would vacation in Destin, Florida. We would drive down to Destin, Florida from Illinois. It's like the longest car drive ever, but it was a lot of fun. And we would do it almost every year. We get out of the winter in Illinois. We drive down to Destin, Florida. We hang out on the beach for a few days. I don't remember how long. It's blurry as a kid. You don't like remember the details. But sometimes we bring friends. Sometimes we bring family. It was just kind of our thing, right? So one of these years, we had a dramatic experience. And along with a friend, we're out there swimming in the ocean and we got caught in a riptide. It pulled us out to the ocean and we were going to crash with these big waves and we were both drowning. And we both thankfully made it out of that. But that was one of the first moments in my life that I remember calling out to God and saying, help. Like, I'm literally drowning here. Help me. And out of nowhere, like immediately after praying that as a 5th grade, 6th grade, however old I was, a huge wave came out of nowhere. And pushed me back to shore, pushed me back to safety, literally with one wave. And when I was reminded of that, that was it. It was like, this is the name. Because a lot of times in life, we go through things that can feel scary. They can feel terrifying. They can feel traumatic. They can feel like this is the end. We've had this with our business in this last season.
And with even just like the pregnancy, like the 9 months of being pregnant, I felt like we're so much of a roller coaster. Like we'd have really good moments and moments of clarity and breakthrough. And I felt like, early on in pregnancy, I was super sick all the time. Am I going to be able to show up and work? Am I going to be able to show up and be a mom? And it was just like this up and down. And God just wanted to remind us of his faithfulness.
And when we connected that story to Wave, it was like, this is the name. So Oliver Wave, that's where the name came from. It represents peace, it represents catalyst, it represents faithfulness. In a time of waiting, there's always going to be that wave. It's like here at a yellow light, there's always going to be a green light, right? And so I was reminded of this of driving when we had this decision to make. We're in we've talked about the abyss, right? Where you're like, I don't know what to do. What should we do? Is this like, and so at that moment, I felt a wave of peace. And I was like, we are wired to be risk takers. That is what we do at the Rainmaker family. We take educated risks, right? Not crazy risks. We're not jumping off cliffs, but we are taking educated risks for the better future of our families. We do this in business. We do this in life. It's stretching, but it requires faith, right? And so we actually looked at the data and we said, hey, 1 in 200, that's pretty good odds. Like, honestly, we said that. Okay. But beyond that, it was also knowing that we had God on our side, that
Yeah.
God was faithful.
And there's also a very confirming moment for me as well. Before Stephen came back into the hospital, my sweet midwife, oh, Grace, you're amazing. She came back in the room while I was being admitted, and the nurse was helping hook me up and check and ask me all these questions. And she came back in and she's like, I just want to let you know that I was just looking on evidence-based birth, which is this awesome website that has tons of research. And I think it's just this mom who runs it. It's really cool. So highly recommend that site. We'll put it in the show notes. But she came back with printed out paper and a highlighted version of this study that had been done about women taking magnesium. What are the risks? All these things, which is absolutely incredible that she spent probably 30 or 40 minutes.
It's a scientific research document. She went through and highlighted all the parts we needed to read.
Yeah. And she just didn't have a lot of concern in her voice. So she just kind of was like, here's what I found. It's actually really interesting based on what you've shown. And I think she kept coming back to, you've only had protein in your urine, your blood pressure has only been high this amount of time, you're not showing any of these other signs
like swelling of hands and here's these other
stuff,
things,
blurred vision, headaches, all this stuff. And so she just had a piece about it, and she's like, you can make your decision, we can wait longer. And then Stephen came back in and I had this whole thing. And so it was just yeah, I think we're just if my blood pressure is skyrocketing or Oliver is showing signs of distress, which he was not, he was totally happy the entire time, then we could do the magnesium drip later on. So we just moved forward. And ever since we had made that decision in the birth, no one talked about the magnesium drip again.
Ever again.
And the funny
crazy
thing was my blood pressure actually stabilized and went down while I was in labor, which is funny because you think it would have gone up because I would have been stressed out from labor. Obviously, that's a stressful thing on your body, but it didn't. So that was just kind of the first beginning of just trusting and maybe doing something a little different than what some people might recommend.
Yeah. And I think it was really cool because I had made the decision on the way back home. Of course, this is Chelsea's body. It's her thing. If she said, I want this, I want to do the magnesium, I don't want to take the chances, I would have gone with it. But I was really feeling okay, I feel peace about this. I'm going to lead and say, this is what I'm feeling. Then I come back. She was feeling the same thing because she was talking with Grace. And then the other cool thing that happened is just maybe a few weeks earlier, we met a new couple at church. We go to a pretty small church. So it was hey, new people, let's talk to them. They had a little 2-year-old who's Kaizen's age. And turns out she is an OB at the hospital. She just moved here. And the really cool part was she actually was working the day. It was not the previous person who was very fear kind of led and just doom and gloom in us. She actually kind of also third confirmed it. And she's like, you know what, it'll be totally fine. If you have to do it, we could do this and that. And she was thinking of other ways. It was really, really sweet to have these triple confirmation on that. And I feel sometimes when you're in this season of let's just say sitting in the ocean, waiting for that wave, or in the abyss, waiting for the breakthrough, right? Sometimes you just have to take a step of faith or take a paddle in the right direction. And then that confirmation comes, right? And we've seen this so many times in our business, in our life, where it feels like a scary step. It feels oh my gosh, I'm stepping out here. But then boom, you have the confirmation and the peace that comes. And so sometimes you follow the peace into it, but sometimes you actually have to step a little bit scared and then the peace is there.
And another thing that brought me a lot of peace too was that Stephen did go home and he did because when we've just found with Kaizen that we just tell him in advance what's going to happen and he's totally fine. When we travel, when a grandparent or something is going to change up his routine, if we tell him in advance, he's fine. And when we left the hospital that day, we hugged him, but we didn't really say hold on a sec, gotta burp Ollie. We didn't really tell him when we come home, you're going to have a baby brother, And so I just felt there might have been a little bit of shock if we came home with a baby and we didn't tell him. So it brought my mama's heart a lot of peace, knowing that Stephen had gone home to pick a few things up. He got to talk to Kaizen. He looked Kaizen in the eye and said, Kaizen, mama's at the hospital. She's going to have a baby. Or you said something like that. And he totally got it. And
He was like, okay.
Like he understood. And for my mama's heart, that just like, that was just really cool that we got that moment, even when we didn't think we were going to have it before. So we are in the hospital. We're admitted. It's probably around like 7 p.m. or so. And we decided to do what's called a Follic balloon. It's this natural method to start induction. And sometimes that works and your body just kicks into gear and goes into labor naturally, which is what I was hoping for. And also the Follic balloon that they put up, you can do research if you want to. It will come out once you've reached 4 centimeters dilated. And I already was like, I think 2 centimeters dilated and like 80% effaced or something like that. So my cervix was soft and ripening, and we were moving in the right direction. And so I started having contractions from the Follic balloon. My body was working, but the contractions were never crazy intense. They never kicked up. And so when the Follic balloon finally fell out, probably around, I don't know, like 2 a.m. or so, my midwife came in, who was a different midwife because they had done a shift change. And she had just said, like, I think you might want to consider doing Pitocin. She's like, I think your body just really needs strong, intense contractions to get this baby out. And so we agreed, but I said, but I just want to wait a couple of hours just to see if my body goes into labor naturally. And this whole time I've been pumping, which can help induce labor. We've been walking. I've been doing all kinds of things to try and help induce labor. We had done like at least one membrane sweep and all these things because I really just was like, if I can avoid Pitocin, I'd love to avoid Pitocin. And I also knew that if I was going to have Pitocin, like Stephen and I should rest. We had been up like, the whole entire day and night. We had both taken a nap the previous afternoon when Kaizen slept, but I just knew that it could be a lot. And I also, at that moment, we could have chosen to not have Pitocin and to just let my body labor naturally and just like wait it out in the hospital. But that just felt exhausting too. And I was just like, I don't want to be up 3 nights in a row waiting for this baby, And right before the shift change happened, the next shift change happened. One of the nurses said to me, and it was like this glimmer of hope. And she was saying her goodbyes before the next nurse came in. And she said, I've seen this happen so many times where second-time moms or even first-time moms, they start taking Pitocin and it is exactly what they needed for their body to kick into gear and to get the baby out. And I've seen it happen so many times where women get on Pitocin and within a few hours, their baby is born. And so for me, that was like a little glimmer of hope because I had just seen like Pitocin just exhaust women and then have to get an epidural. And then your body's stalling, which can happen when you get an epidural, and then you can, have a C-section or whatever. So
the other cool thing that happened, I forgot about this until just now, is when we got admitted into the room we were in was 63. And like me and Chelsey have gotten really good at paying attention to just those little small kind of intuitions or thoughts. And so I had a thought as soon as we got in the room. It was the date was March 5th when we got admitted. Mm-hmm. And I had this thought. I was like, the baby will be born on 6/3. Or sorry, 3/6.
Yeah.
Because we were in 63, but I just had this such a random thought, right?
Yeah.
Like you got to pay attention to that stuff.
March 5th, and we got into the room 63, and you just thought the baby's going to be born on
3/6. Like I was like, that's his birthday. And so like I just had that thought. I shared that with Chelsey. And sure enough, he was born on 3/6. And so like that also gave hope to go like, this thing is going to happen. Like, because Pitocin was kind of this thing that had this mental wall sometimes for you, like in the past, you had dealt with it, but still at that point of making the decision again and going, okay, we're really going to do this. It was like, this baby's going to be born and we're going to make it happen.
Yeah. So that was really confirming for you. So right before my midwife is about to sign off on Pitocin, it's like 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning, the sun starts to shine through the window in our hospital room, and I hear the song "Great Is Thy Faithfulness," and it's just this beautiful old hymn. I feel like that is played at a lot of different events, and it's just this beautiful hymn. And it says some of the lyrics are, "Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All that I needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness." And for me, that song was just God's faithfulness and God's reminder to me, like, that you can do this and that you're going to have this baby and you can trust me and you can let go of expectations and that this outcome is going to be good. Because even though my body was progressing and I knew the baby would be born soon, which is obviously really exciting, in the back of my mind, I did have a little bit of fear of, like, what if Pitocin doesn't work? What if I can't handle it? What if I'm going to have to go down this cascade of interventions and have an epidural, which I really didn't want to do? And then maybe that would lead to a C-section. And I was just in labor. Any woman knows this. You go through moments of being like, I'm so empowered, I can do this, to like almost defeat, like, I don't know if I can keep going anymore. And birth is such a mental battle. Labor and birth is such a mental battle. And God just reminded me, like, great is thy faithfulness. I've got you. And I just started crying in that moment. It was just like a moment by myself. Stephen was asleep on the couch. No nurses or the midwives were in. It was just a moment between me and God where I surrendered. And it was God reminding me, like, you're going to get the outcome that you desire. And here's a glimmer of hope because I'm with you always. Even in the rocky moments, I know that this was not what you expected at all, but I am still with you. And so I just really clung to that. And then the midwife came in shortly after, before the shift change started, Pitocin. And our doula started making her way to the hospital too, because we told her, hey, Chelsea's going to get Pitocin. It'd be really awesome for you to come in and help with that laboring portion, just as a support person. And another big cool thing that happened is they just changed hospital policy so that she was able to come in, and we didn't know if she would be able to either at that
with
moment.
all the COVID stuff.
Well, all the COVID stuff and testing and all this crazy things. So that was a huge gift.
Sweet.
So Pitocin starts, and for me, I said I want the least amount of Pitocin possible. There's like a scale, like 1 milliliter all the way up to like 36. And oftentimes, if you don't communicate with your provider like the type of drip you want, they'll just like ramp it up,
put you on
right
36,
away, put you on something crazy. So I said, we're going to ramp up slowly, because with Pitocin, your body, again, it's like fake oxytocin that is tricking your body or telling your body to start contracting and going into labor. And sometimes your body will just start doing it on its own. And so they can actually take you off of Pitocin. And so I said, I want the lowest amount possible. And then I think they increased it every half an hour or so.
Yeah, they would check in every half hour. They check in every half hour, see how intense it was feeling and everything, and then they would increase it.
Yeah, so it was about probably 8 a.m. or so. I had been given my first kind of dose of Pitocin, and contractions were definitely picking up. They were never super consistent, but they were definitely picking up. And I had my doula do some sideline positioning with me, because that it was supposed to really help ramp things up. And the contractions got really intense around that time, and I was just like, man, that was intense, but I know that this is what my body needs. And probably around 10 a.m. or so, so I'd been on Pitocin a couple of hours, things got pretty intense. And so for me, I knew that I wanted to labor in the tub. I did that with Kaizen, and it was this huge relief. So I told my nurses and Stephen, I want to get into the tub and labor in the tub. And that was when things really started progressing. So I'd been in the tub, I don't even know, 40 minutes or
lose
so.
track of time
You
in the
lose
tub.
track of time at this point. So I got into the tub, and then I started getting really hot. And I was like, oh, turn off the water, make it cold again, And I started getting to this place where I was just like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I'm tired. I was up a lot of the night. My body's on Pitocin. I don't know if I can handle this. I started having those, again, questioning doubts, oh man, I think I might need an epidural. I don't know what's going on. And my midwife had come in, my new midwife, because again, another shift change. And I said to her, like, I would love for you to check me to see how far along I am, but I'm also nervous because I don't want to get discouraged. And something that women don't often realize is that doctors and nurses use like the number like 10 centimeters, all these things as trackers, but oftentimes those trackers can be off. Like you could be at a 4 and go to a 10 centimeter in like half an hour super quickly.
Yeah.
Sometimes your body responds. So
It's not linear.
it's not linear like a lot of hospitals and OBs will say that it is.
I think on Kai's birth, we had them not even tell you, because we knew that we were like, we don't want to be discouraged by a number. If it could just like, it could happen in 30 minutes, even if you can go from 6 to a 10.
Yeah.
And so we had them tell me, but for this one, you wanted to know.
I wanted to know. Yeah. And and it's actually more important to pay attention to some physical signs and how you're feeling sometimes than it is more so to pay attention to the number. So
yeah, and I remembered that. That was like one of my only takeaways from the first, not only takeaways, but you go to all these like classes and things, and we were actually working with a birth coach, and she gave us a super handy chart on like, here's like the like emotional and kind of like feeling kind of indicators, not just the physical indicators. Like it was like physical feeling. This is the thoughts. These are what you might be saying. And so as soon as Chelsey, like in the tub, was starting to say, as soon as Chelsey started saying, I'm not sure if I can do this. Like, what if I go a lot long? She started kind of like, it was like this, she'd done the same thing with Kyson in the tub. I went out to talk with the doula. I was like, Chelsea's about to have the baby. Like she's talking like she can't do it. Like we knew that was it's a signpost for transition.
Yeah, for transition, which for me speeds up really quickly once I am in transition. I feel like I've realized after having 2 babies. But for me, in that moment in the tub, I was mentally thinking, okay, I'm feeling like I'm in transition based on the fact that I feel like I can't do this any longer. But I'm also on Pitocin. And I've heard stories of women being on Pitocin and they're like, I can't do this anymore. And they feel like they're at like an 8 or a 9 when really they're only still at a 4 or a 5. And so I just didn't know. I'm like, is this the Pitocin talking, or is my body actually in transition? And so when my midwife came and talked to me, I expressed to her, I said, I'd love to be checked, but I'm also like super nervous because I don't want to be discouraged. And so she was just like, okay, like, well, I'll give you more time to think about if you want to be checked. I'll come back in like half an hour. So my midwife actually left because I hadn't fully decided, do I want to be checked? Do I not want to be checked? And she had kind of had a busy morning. I think there are a lot of babies being delivered through midwifery care that day. And so I was probably in the tub 5 more minutes. And then I start to feel the urge to push and to poop, which is like also a sign that you're about to have a baby. And for me, I was in the tub and it felt like a relief to kind of push, like, because there's so much pressure that happens when you're about to have the baby. Like the baby's head creates a lot of pressure to get the baby out. And so I started and I noticed that. So I was like, maybe I am further along. So I get out of the tub and I say out loud, I said, I feel like I need to poop. And I say that a couple of times. And my nurse, who had been watching me the whole time, came down at my level and she just said, you're really hard to read because you're so calm. And I kind of laughed and I said, I don't feel like I'm calm, but thank you. And what she was getting at is like, what she was kind of alluding to is like, do I need to get the midwife in here because you're about to have this baby, because you're talking like you need to push this baby out. So I go on to I said, like, I feel like I need to poop. So I was like, well, maybe I actually do need to poop. So I got in the toilet and having contractions. Also, I've been told by different birth workers that the toilet is one of the best positions to labor in because of gravity and like all these other things. So my midwife, so sweet and incredible, she comes in because I'm saying things like I need to poop and I have the urge to push. And she is able to kind of check me on the toilet. Obviously, she said, I'm going to try and check you. And so she did. And she's like, because you're on the toilet, it's a little bit hard to get the most accurate reading, but I would say you're about an 8. And at that moment, I started to cry. out of relief because I knew that our baby would be born super
I didn't know.
soon.
I was like, is she crying because she like really wanted to be like a 10, or is like she crying because like I thought she was upset, but then she's like, no, I'm relieved. So I was like, oh, cool, me too.
I just said I'm so relieved because I just knew. I knew that urge that I was feeling was actually bringing the baby down the birth canal. And so from that moment on, things even got way more intense. And my midwife is so sweet. I love how she just gave me permission, even though I didn't need her to. I knew I could. Sometimes nurses, this is a side note, sometimes nurses, OBs, even midwives in a hospital setting will ask you to get back onto the bed and push, with the typical movie, laying on your back, feet in the stirrups, pushing the baby out. And that is actually one of the worst positions to get your baby out because you're working against gravity. Your baby, when it comes out of the birth canal, it actually has to turn and rotate. And when you're lying on your back, your baby's head is hitting your pelvis, and it's just not optimal position. That's where women tear the most and have to sometimes work a lot harder to get their baby out. So side note, you do not have to get on the bed and push your baby out if you don't want to.
Yeah.
So,
and it's like, I would say it's optimal for the medical professionals
because
like
why they do it. It's convenient for
it's
them.
very convenient, but the secret they probably won't tell you is they love delivering in other places. And this is what we found out.
Not all. But so I knew in Kaizen, I delivered on the hospital floor with a birthing stool. And I knew I had done a lot of research on pushing and optimal positioning, and hands and knees and runner's pose are the two most optimal positions. They're also very primal, which is what happened with Kaizen. Like that's just what felt good and what my body needed. So I obeyed. I didn't fight it and say like, this is weird, I'm on my hands and knees on the hospital floor. I just went with it. And so my midwife said, Chelsey, you can give birth, you can have your baby wherever you'd like. She was even giving, because I was on the toilet, she was giving me permission if I wanted to give birth on the toilet. But she did ask me, she said, would you be willing to get off the toilet and try this commode, which is like, a toilet that you go to the bathroom in if you're having
it's like a handicap toilet.
It's like a handicap toilet.
Or it's like it's a toilet with like handles.
Yeah, or just a portable toilet. So she brought this commode in because obviously it would be easier if I were to give birth on a toilet, it would have been easier for me to give birth on a commode where there's more room and you can catch the baby than like in the toilet. So I say, okay, I'll try the commode because it's, same to the toilet, but it was not working out for me. It was not a good position.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. So I was just like, screw it. I'm getting back on the floor where I birthed Kaizen. So I get on my hands and knees.
So we're in the bathroom.
We're in the bathroom.
So
in this small, tiny bathroom.
Just paint a picture here. There is a tub.
Yeah.
There's a sink and a toilet and like maybe 3 feet of like floor space wide.
Yeah.
And then maybe like 8 feet long, know? So it's a tight space.
Yeah. So I get on my hands and knees and I know that
the midwife's in there. I'm in there.
And then I have like my doula and all the nurses like lined up, I think. Like
they're all
waiting.
at the door. Like it's just like a crowd of people like peeking their head through the door.
And I don't know. I don't really know that this is happening because you just go so instinctual and you just tune out everything. So I know that I'm about to push this baby out. And one of my goals with having a second baby is I didn't want to tear. And I really wanted to focus on just breathing and letting my body push the baby out. Basically not pushing, yeah. Which I know sounds crazy, but if you do research on pushing, you will literally, like the two kinds of women that don't have any tearing at all are actually quadriplegic women and people who have heart conditions. And the reason is because someone who has quadriplegic can't feel her baby being pushed out. So it just comes out of her. And then people with heart conditions, if they raise their blood pressure or anything happens, they are also not able to push their baby out themselves. So your body just does it for you. Like if you let it, which I know sounds weird. And so I was really conscious of like when the contraction comes, my body is going to know what to do and I don't need to grunt and all of these things. And with Kaizen, I didn't really tear that much either. It was like a good experience, but I just was like, I think that was an area that I can like work on for this baby and just be more mindful of if possible.
Well, I mean, and also I'm speaking from what I've heard, not from experience, but this can be the most uncomfortable part, like what
Yeah.
is like the ring of fire,
Yeah.
And so like your mind tells you to push. It's like, get out of this, right?
I don't know.
Like when you got the ring of fire, right?
Yeah.
And you know that if you kind of went and pushed,
Yeah.
then the ring of fire would end. Then your mind is telling you get through it. But you kind of were like, no, I know that I just need to ride the wave. I will
Yeah.
get through it, but it'll be better if I don't like hurry it, basically.
Yes. Yeah. So with all of
Because it
our,
needs time to stretch and all the things.
yeah, exactly. So I just really like in between the contractions, it was totally silent and I rested, and it felt like long resting periods in between each contraction. And when the contraction would come, I worked with my body and I let it do its thing. And then he was born at 11:47 in the morning.
I'm glad you remember that because I forgot.
11:47. Yeah, in the morning. And my midwife said, all right, Chelsey, like your baby. Oh, and the whole time, like I said on my birth suggestions that I didn't want to be coached during pushing, that I just wanted to like do my thing. Because normally providers will say like, all right, and the next one's coming, go ahead and bear down and all these things. And so I really didn't want that because I knew that my body would do its thing, and everybody honored that. But when I was like getting the baby out and pushing, it was really sweet. I did hear a couple of my nurses like, Chelsey, you're doing an amazing job. Just keep going.
It was all encouragement.
It was all encouragement
Super
and
good.
empowerment, which was so cool. And so, a couple pushes before he came out, my midwife kind of prepped me on like, okay, when he comes out, your baby's going to be born any second. We're going to pass him through your legs and onto your chest. And so she kind of prepped me in between, which is exactly what they did with Kaizen too. And so he came out.
I mean, at that point, everyone started crying.
Yeah. Yeah. And right before that, right before a couple more pushes, I knew he would be out. We started
talking
crying, and we just said, welcome, baby. You're so welcome. Like, I love you, baby.
Yeah. It was like, welcome home. You can, we just started talking to Ollie, basically.
Yeah.
So it's just like me, Chelsey, and Ollie in the bathroom floor and the toilet. And like a bunch of nurses peeking their head through the thing. They're like, Chelsea's not, she's in her own world. I'm also like holding her hands in that world. But it was just such a funny, like beautiful, just like cinematic moment in like, like the most like, unheard of place, but it was just so beautiful. And I have a couple photos, of Chelsey just like laying against the bathtub with Ollie on her chest afterwards, just like, just total relief and just like he's here. Yeah,
I went both boys. Like the minute that our babies have been placed on my chest, it's just like ugly cry, sobbing, just like the oxytocin rush that women talk about in birth, especially when there aren't all these additional interventions and things like that, is just absolutely incredible. And it was just so cool and such a relief, because even though we allowed the midwives to induce us, and even though I did have some interventions, I was still able to get the birth that we desired, the unmedicated, like bringing him into the world. It was still peaceful, and it was still like the ending that I had envisioned, even though I didn't know if we would have that at one point. And that was hard and just a leap of faith. And then they said, all right, because I was on the hospital floor in the bathroom. They're like, after I had some moments and felt ready, they helped walk me while Ollie was on my chest to the bed, just to kind of finish what they do and have the placenta be birthed and all that stuff. And it was really cool. Like I didn't tear, I didn't need any stitches. I barely had any bleeding, just like things that I had really hoped for ended up happening. And I think the really amazing thing was I had like literally all of my nurses and my midwife came up to me at different points and said, like, your birth is like the reason why I wanted to be a labor and delivery birth. Like your birth is the reason why I do what I do. It's like what we live for. Like
I mean, I'm sure
unmedical way of not unmedical way, but just like women trusting their body and women knowing that they can do it. And even if there's interventions, they can still trust their body. It doesn't need to be this scary process. Your body knows what to do. And I think that's why they were just, everyone was crying. That's why they were so moved by it. And because of just the peace that Ollie carries too.
Oh, yeah.
So Oliver Wave Diaz was born on, here he is in the video. If you see this on our YouTube channel, you can see video clips of this. But Oliver Wave was born on March 6th at 11:47. In the morning, he was 6 pounds 5 inches, 6 pounds 5 ounces, 9 inches, oh my gosh. 6 pounds 5 ounces, 20 inches long. Yeah, with a full head of hair, and he's just so perfect and beautiful. And I think a huge takeaways from this is that I mean, every time, both times I've had a baby, I just walk away with so much appreciation for labor and delivery nurses, especially with Oliver. Like, they're just so special. I mean, the nurses do everything. They're such servants, like cleaning up stuff and making sure you're okay and like helping you with this and encouraging you. And I love midwifery care. I will rave about it forever. And I'm sure there are some OBs that have certain similar practices, but I just love the approach that midwives have and how they care for women and just meet their needs. And I just have such an appreciation, like so much love for them. Like it just makes me smile thinking about the service. And I know the healthcare world in general in the last couple of years, it's been really hard and challenging. And like literally we got a chance a few weeks after Oliver was born to go back and thank some of our nurses and midwives that were there. And that was just really special. And I think a big takeaway for me, just in general, is just God's faithfulness, and that I can recount and rethink about his goodness in my life. And even though when things seem rocky and it's scary and it's unknown, like there's still a good story, and you come out on the other side stronger. And so I'm really proud of Oliver's birth story. I think it's really cool that I can relate to women who have had, no intervention birth where it goes smooth sailing, and like Kaizen's birth where I feel like God really showed me what could be possible, and just to have hope that we can have things better than we hoped or expected, which was Kaizen's case in his birth story. And then with Oliver, it was like learning to lean in and to trust when things are scary. And I'm proud that I have gone through like different interventions, because now I can encourage another mama who might be facing induction and is scared and doesn't want Pitocin and all these things. And I'm just here to say that you can still have a great birth experience even with those, and there can be no trauma, and just trust your body and know that God designed it to be good, and that birth is a physiological process, and we can trust what is happening.
Yeah. I'm so proud of you, Chelsey, and proud of you, Ollie. Ollie's here with us.
You did so good.
You guys all did so amazing, and it's who you become in the process that's even more powerful, even in our business and our life.
Yeah.
There are facts that come up. There are scary facts. There are terrifying facts. There's traumatic facts. There's facts that want to knock you off your mission, your momentum, right? And facts, we have a choice, like of what belief we're going to create out of that fact. We can, faith and doubt are both beliefs, right? Like faith is this belief in an outcome we do desire, while doubt is a belief in an outcome we don't desire. And it was tempting to go down the doubt train. And like, we're not saying that we didn't do that, in seasons. Mm-hmm. I'm so thankful that when Chelsea's going down that train, I got the faith train. And when I'm going down that train, the doubt road, like she has, like we balance each other. And we just want to encourage you wherever you're at in your business, your life, whatever facts are being thrown at you, you do have a choice on that, on how you see it. Is it going to produce faith? Is it going to produce hopeful future thinking that you can hold on to, that's going to get you through it? Or is it going to produce doubt that's going to lead to anxiety, lead to ceasing your momentum and just downward spiral? So you do have a choice. We had a lot of choices, and this wasn't the last test with Ollie. And so this podcast, I know, has been a long one. It's a personal one. So thank you if you're in our world. Those are probably the people listening to this long podcast. So we love you all. We have another podcast coming about something else that happened with Ollie that you may have seen on social media, where we spent another few nights in the hospital. There was a airlift involved. There was an ambulance involved. And it was another one of those testers where it said like, hey, you're in the ocean. Are you going to wait for the wave? And there was decisions in that. So we're going to tell that story on another podcast. And then we would love to do one last personal kind of podcast on just some takeaways in our time off. We spent 2 months off of our business, which was crazy. And our business did not burn to the ground. It kept running, and it even thrived. Like, our team totally stepped up, leveled up, and we learned a lot in that process. And so we would love to do an episode sharing those takeaways that you can apply to your business to double your impact with half the hustle.
Yeah. And if learning more about birth experiences, how you can trust your body, learning more about having a physiological birth or just healing from trauma. In the show notes will be some of the things that I found really helpful in both boys, as well as I will link Kaizen's birth story, because I think that sets a lot of foundation for where my mindset has come from birth. There's just going to be some great resources as far as the birth course that I went through on how to manage contractions, understand what is happening in each stage of labor, how to push, even like postpartum recovery, and just great mindset stuff that is spiritual, but I think can be applied to anyone, as well as some books in there that led me to love midwifery care. And also, if you're interested, if something comes up, just to understand, look at studies and see how you can make an informed decision about your birth and what is happening. So those are all in the show notes for you, as Oliver squeaks away while I'm nursing him.
It sounds like Oliver's saying goodbye. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Rainmaker Family Show. We'll see you on the next episode. We love you all. Thanks for listening to this episode.
To continue your Rainmaker journey, check out the links in the show notes and let's connect.
And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with a friend today.